I use the gavel, I bang it hard. If you could do one thing today or tomorrow, what would that be to make it better for industry?
I would say specific to our sector, reciprocity would probably move the needle the quickest.
I think an area that's been a particular challenge for financial institutions is cyber incident reporting. These requirements often have slightly different definitions, timeframes for reporting, and information requirements. They would first have to report to the Federal Housing Administration within 12 hours of detection. They'd have to notify their primary banking regulator within 36 hours. Another notification to Ginnie Mae within 48 hours. Once CERCIA is finalized, they'd have to provide a very detailed report to CISA within 72 hours. And then finally, publicly disclose that incident to the SEC within 4 business days.
Compliance burdens are growing every day. Again, I think they're disproportionately hitting the smaller companies in the sector even more harshly.
Pleased to introduce our witnesses for today's hearing. Our first witness is Mr. John Miller, Vice President of Policy, Trust, Data, and Technology, and General Counsel at the Information Technology Industry Council. Our second witness is Ms. Maggie O'Connell, Director of Security, Reliability, and Resilience at the Interstate Natural Gas Association of America. Our third witness is Mr. Patrick Warren, Vice President, Regulatory Technology with the Banking Policy Institute. And our fourth and final witness today is Dr. Charles Clancy, Chief Technology Officer at MITRE. Let me remind the witnesses we have read your written statements and they will appear in full in the hearing record. Please limit your oral statements to 5 minutes this morning. As a reminder, please press the button on the microphone in front of you so that it is on and that the members up here can hear you. When you begin to speak, the light in front of you will turn green. After 4 minutes, it will turn yellow. When the light comes on and it turns red, your 5 minutes have expired. I use the gavel. I bang it hard. Let's not do that today. 70% figure. You're in the banking sector, so it might be slightly different. Is it the same in natural gas and IT? Are you seeing the 70%? What's the figure roughly of percentage of cybersecurity workers generally within industry that you guys represent that are focused on compliance? Do you have a handle on that?
I don't have exact numbers in front of me, but based on the information that I've heard from our members, that sounds about accurate, yes.
Even in natural gas, Mr. Miller?
I mean, I think I don't have exact numbers either, but I do think it varies by companies, right? I mean, certainly larger multinational tech companies have more resources, so they are able to devote more resources to both compliance and better security outcomes. I think that there are a lot of small and medium-sized companies in the tech sector, and I think that these types of conflicting requirements that we're talking about today really disproportionately hit those companies who it's much more of a zero-sum game for them. If you're
much more expensive, the cost of legal fees.
If you're a 10-person company and you may not even be able to figure out what regulations you have to comply with. It creates, I think, a bad situation.
Yeah. So in terms of that, and I only have 2.5 minutes left roughly, and I'd like to hear from all members on the panel. I'll start with Ms. O'Connell. I'll start with you. It's almost like, where do you start? But if you could just do one thing, one bill, one policy, one regulation, one piece of legislation, what is that one thing? Because we are so big, we are so bureaucratic. I mean, a comprehensive policy, it just ain't gonna happen, right? And it's not gonna happen in the next decade because we're not nimble anymore. We don't move that fast, unfortunately. But if you could do one thing today or tomorrow, what would that be to make it better for industry?
I would say specific to our sector, reciprocity would probably move the needle the quickest, given we have multiple security regulators across our industry. Any efforts to sort of streamline and have one set of requirements be applicable to another set of regulations would really be, I think, an efficient way to move that needle quickly.
Thank you, Mr. Warren.
Sure. I think an area that's been a particular challenge for financial institutions is cyber incident reporting. These requirements often have slightly different definitions, timeframes for reporting, and information requirements. And so hypothetically, if a financial institution were to experience a reportable incident, they would first have to report to the Federal Housing Administration within 12 hours of detection. They'd have to notify their primary banking regulator within 36 hours. Another notification to Ginnie Mae within 48 hours. Once CERCIA is finalized, they'd have to provide a very detailed report to CISA within 72 hours. and then finally publicly disclose that incident to the SEC within 4 business days. So compiling all of those reports, similar but distinct reports, takes a lot of time from frontline cyber personnel, which leaves less time for day-to-day security.
Would it be better if it just went to CISA and then CISA distributed it accordingly?
Sure, and I think CISA has been tasked with harmonizing cybersecurity regulations under CERCIA. Unfortunately, with their recent proposed rule to implement that legislation, it seems they've taken an expansive approach to implementing that law. We provided comment with a number of other financial trades, encouraging them to better leverage existing requirements. And leaders in the House Homeland Security Committee and Senate HISGAC provided similar feedback as well.
Dr. Clancy, we have 15 seconds. You want to chime in?
I would just amplify that. I think you can build on CERCIA and make it that clearinghouse for reporting that coordinates across the interagency.
Banks are often a target of cyber attacks or attempted attacks. Is that not correct?
No, that's correct, as a critical infrastructure.
Right. And how many, collectively, how many Americans are customers of banks?
I'm not sure I have the exact number of how many.
Kind of most of us, right?
Yes.
So the government has some interest in protecting those people, working with the banking community in making sure their data is not disclosed, misused, assets diverted, deposits corrupted, just like banks do, presumably, because you don't want to lose customers. You'd concede that point.
Yes.
And so the issue is how best to do that, right? What's the balance between, the need of banks to do their business, or the gas industry or anybody else, while the government tries to get its arms around the cyber problem and hopefully working with industry to protect American consumers. And, it's going to be natural that we may have disagreements about how far we go. Do you think if we got government entirely out of the business, the banking industry could handle this all by itself? Thank you very much. We, the banking industry, could come up with our own set of standards, our own cyber protection policies that would be fairly standard and would voluntarily comply with them, and there'd be no problem.
I think the financial sector is supportive of has been supportive of a number of confidential reporting requirements like CERCIA and the banking 36-hour notification rule. Those regulators work very collaboratively with industry to develop that requirement. I think really it's about striking the right balance here. We recognize the importance of these requirements for the enhanced visibility they provide for the cyber threat environment and to warn potential downstream victims. I think it's less an issue of cost and more one of time.
If you had to put a dollar figure on it, what is the cost of complying of the conflicts and the regulatory burdens that you're facing?
Thank you for the question. I don't know that I have an actual aggregate number of the amount of the compliance burden that we're talking about here. I mean, I guess I would just say that by all accounts, it's significant, and I do think it's probably even more significant for heavily regulated industries, such as my colleagues here up on the panel. But it seems to be a problem. The compliance burdens are growing every day, and again, I think they're disproportionately hitting the smaller companies in the sector even more harshly.
I would sort of echo that. The compliance costs, I think, vary greatly based on your company size, the complexity of your operations, your staffing. INGA generally, as a trade association, tries to stay out of conversations around cost for antitrust reasons, so it's difficult for me to kind of quantify that. But to your point, I mean, I think it does disproportionately affect smaller entities across all critical infrastructure, not just oil and natural gas.
Similar to my fellow panelists, I'm not sure I'm able to provide a ballpark estimate. There will be some variance across our member financial institutions. the bottom line is firms are going to spend whatever they have to in order to secure their environments. But what I will say is we have heard from firms that staff have had to work exceedingly long hours to balance the burden of regulatory compliance with their day-to-day security obligations, and there are scenarios where that has led to decreased morale and staff burnout.
What specifically, what policies and specifically are affecting your industry that we might be able to address? And are they laws, are they rules? What are they? And if you could go down the line.
Sure. I mean, I think the example that I cited earlier and that others have talked about here is, I think, top of mind for many folks, and that's cyber incident reporting regulations and requirements. You know, on the one hand, we have Congress recently passing, a couple of years ago, CERCIA, the bill, a federal bill with an idea of streamlining requirements and, also setting up the CIRC, Cyber Incident Reporting Council, to issue a report and streamline requirements. The requirements do vary. I mean, obviously, CERCIA is an underlying legislative regulation, but there are different requirements that vary over those. I think it was 52 in total, different types of requirements and regulations on incident reporting. And again, the problem is that even though we have identified the problem, and Congress has identified the problem, and we've set up a group, the Counsel, to fix it. Even after that report has come out, we've had more divergent requirements being proposed. An example is there was a FAR regulation that was proposed just a couple of months after that varied from the recommendations in that report. So, I mean, that's the example that I would use for the IT industry is incident reporting.
Ms. O'Connell?
I would echo the incident reporting requirements. I mean, we currently are required to report incidents to CISA within 24 hours under the first TSA security directive. We also have CERCIA. There's also state and local reporting requirements. But I would also, on the more kind of risk-based kind of regulatory side, I would say hastily promulgated regulations are also a real challenge for compliance. For example, when TSA first issued its first iteration of the second security directive, they required some very prescriptive mitigation measures that were either impossible to achieve in the pipeline environment or with existing technologies, or they had, perhaps reactive and inconsequent, like downstream impacts to pipeline reliability and safety, and those weren't considered when TSA first promulgated that security directive. They've since undertaken a very robust consultative process with industry and with the other regulators in the pipeline and oil and natural gas industry to make it more risk-based and outcome-focused. And I think as long as regulations are promulgated with that risk-based, outcome-focused, threat-informed mentality, then they can be successful. But when they're overly prescriptive and they are reactive, that's where the challenge can be within compliance.
Mr. Warren.
Incident reporting is a challenge for our sector as well, but another place where sometimes overlap and duplication occurs is in the supervisory environment, where one financial regulator will examine a firm on a given topic, say identity and access management, and shortly after that exam concludes, another regulator will come in and examine the exact or similar topic that pulls on the same cyber personnel and is sort of a consistent exam regulatory obligation for them rather than their day-to-day security responsibilities.
Yeah, because if I may, can I continue? It's a lot of work to pull all of those reports. When you're talking about identity and access management alone, to pull all of those reports and who has specific role access for any software, it can be a daunting task. And then to have to do it repeatedly and based on whatever the demand is for the different agency, I can absolutely see why that would be problematic. We've got the industry who's creating these certification levels and these standards that are not necessarily connected to the government. Which is more important to meet? I mean, which would you prefer, to try to meet the industry standard, these certification levels, or to try to comply with these regulators?
I mean, I think you're raising a really good point, Congressman. You know, I think that there are a lot of different, it's an important reminder that, you know, regulations are not the answer to everything, right? That's not going to solve all of our problems. You know, we've got regulations, we've got frameworks such as the cybersecurity framework, we've got international standards, we've got guidance, then there are administrative requirements. So there's a lot going on there. But, you know, in terms, I think they're all important and they all have a role. But what's really most important from a company standpoint is that, you know, everything is hopefully oriented toward common consensus-based standards, and that those standards are risk management standards, right? I mean, we're talking about risk management, which, you know, is not only just about defending. I don't want to minimize the importance of that, but also response and recovery efforts as well. I mean, all of this is important. You know, cybersecurity has a lot of dimensions, and from an industry standpoint, we need to do it all. We need to do it all well. We just need to align and not be operating at cross purposes.
Sure, I would say the golden ticket is when regulations are aligned with industry standards. Of course, that can't always happen, but you know, when it does, when regulations are again promulgated in a way that is consultative with the industry, that's when you can get the best result of the regulation.
And I think this is a place where industry can leverage common frameworks that sort of reference regulatory requirements and common standards to sort of validate that they are where they need to be from a cybersecurity standpoint and hopefully streamline some of these compliance requirements.
If there's no further business and without objection, we stand adjourned.